given that as an example and kind of best practices of how to take down larger deals. So this presentation is completely meant to be interactive, right? So if anybody has any questions, like feel free to interrupt me, feel free to raise your hand. Definitely happy to stop and answer any questions that you have.
Do you want me to do it or you want
Yeah. The next slide. So, back one. So quickly, who am I? So my name's Andrew Freed. I am an agent. I still have my W-2 as a project manager. House hacker, been on the Bigger Pockets podcast twice. And yeah, I mean, in a matter of 3 years, I went from 0 to over 130 units. And I currently have 87 units under contract at this very moment. So it's been quite the journey. And I really have kind of my network to thank for it, like Josh over here, you know, John and the Simplified and Candor team. Like, I wouldn't be where I'm at without such an amazing network. So like, it's really important that you're in this room right now, because this is how you do scale in real estate, is with people in this room. You find your best lenders here, Brian Ruminowski over there. You find your best insurance people, Doug Mercurio, best attorneys, Doug. Like, these are the people that make your team and allow you to scale easily and quickly. So for tonight's agenda, we're going to be going over finding a deal, how we went about finding this large, around 70 unit portfolio in Massachusetts. We're going to be going over how to analyze such a deal, which is a lot easier than people think. People think analyzing a large deal is very challenging, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't make sense in the back of a napkin, it's not going to make sense in your fancy calculator, right? Negotiating the deal, like how do we go about negotiating this type of larger deal and taking it down with lending partners, with seller credits, things like that. We're going to be talking about the due diligence process, right? Like in real estate, it's very important to trust but verify, right? We're going to be going over when you do these larger deals, you want to walk every single unit. Like, it's very important. You miss one unit, you walk in and needs 30K worth of work, that's really going to hurt your return, right? So it's incredibly important to walk every unit during the due diligence process and make extensive notes, right, of the tenant base, of the unit, of the cosmetic upgrades, of the condition. Like, it's really imperative to make comprehensive notes, because you're going to walk so many units, it's going to blend into one, right? So if you don't take notes, you're going to forget. And then obviously always get an inspection done. You know, I own all these units. I think I maybe had one property that I didn't do an inspection on, right? So it's really important to get a trained set of eyes on your property, regardless of the size. And you can still get deals under contract with these due diligence and with inspections. And then how to like the design of a deal. How do you take down a deal of this size, right? Like, how did I go about that, and how you can too, right? Raising capital, like what are best practices for raising capital for such a large deal? I mean, I believe this was around a $5.5 million purchase price. Like, I didn't have $2 million, but I knew people who did, right? And that's how I was able to close such a larger deal. And then partnering, which has been incredibly important for my growth. For my particular path, I closed my first 10 units with my own money, primarily HELOCs, right? My next 20 units I joint ventured on with other investors, and when I got to 30 units, I kind of ran out of my own money, and that's when I really started taking money from investors, and it really allowed me to scale. And then also the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, deals are great, but there's always something that happens in a deal. Like, I'm signing papers on 2 deals tomorrow, right? For example, we're closing on a 3 unit. A couple investors are bringing me the down payment for a 3-family as a wholesale. We're gonna close, we're gonna put on the MLS, we're gonna list it, right? For that particular deal, they're requiring every one of us now to go to the closing office, right? And some people's out in Springfield. Like, that's like a big issue for like bringing investors on, and that's like things you have to get over. And you always have these hurdles. No matter what deal it is, you're always gonna have hurdles and issues to resolve.
So how do you overcome that? Do you use remote notaries, or?
I told them to get their ass there.
Solid answer.
Like, or I'm closing on a 3-plex tomorrow, and I'm closing on a 9-plex, right? Like, the seller didn't arrange a final walkthrough, right? But we're like, dude, we're not closing on this, this $800,000 property without a final walkthrough. So, essentially, I have this meetup right now. My partner's doing other things. We have an assistant that we sent down there the day of to walk the units for us, take pictures, getting all the units to ensure that the property is in the original state that we did when we got under contract. So that's another example of problem resolution, right?
I have one for that. I recently had someone close like 3 months ago. They didn't do the final walkthrough. Their realtor was like, yeah, you don't need to. And they got back to the house and they're texting me pictures of flooding in the basement. One of the furnaces, the water, pressurized water line, leaking all over the place.
Yeah, and that goes back to trust but verify, right? So this particular deal, this was a 69 unit portfolio encompassing across 12 properties in New Bedford, Massachusetts, right? Here are the beautiful properties that we have. That one right there is that 54 Russell Street I spoke about that I told you it's listed right now. So these are the properties that we got under contract. How do we find these properties? We found these properties off market through a direct mailer. One of my partners ended up sending a mailer to a bunch of owners that owned a lot of multifamily. One particular owner died, but this went to their estate. And they looked at it and they thought, oh, this would be a great opportunity to sell. So we ended up getting this under contract before they even had the right to sell this thing, right? So we essentially got to the seller before it hit the open market, before it hit the MLS, and we didn't have any competition. So, and the magical thing about an estate sale is during an estate, they appraise the value of this asset, right? So day one, it appraised for $6.5 million. We got under contract for $5.5 million. So day one, when we knew we were walking into $1 million in equity. But just add to that, when you're going after larger deals, it's incredibly important to build in seller credits, and that's exactly what we did. We actually offered 5.75 with a $250,000 seller credit, and we incorporated construction money in the stabilization process. So we ended up getting around a $300,000 line of credit to enhance the property. And why is that important? That's important because the less money you bring to the deal, the better your cash on cash return is, right? So it's incredibly important for these larger deals to think creatively, like maybe it doesn't make sense at the current purchase price doing this, but maybe if you incorporate construction money, maybe if you incorporate seller credits, you might actually make the numbers work and the cash on cash make sense, right? And at the end of the day with these larger deals, most of us don't have the money to take it down, so it has to make sense to your investors for it to make sense to you, right? And to be honest with you, I didn't even find the deal. I actually got the deal because somebody else found the deal. They didn't have the means or the resources to take it down, but I was all over social media, I created a brand, and they thought, who can actually take this deal down? And my name came to mind, they brought the deal to me. And I'll get into some of those challenges later, but my main role was kind of asset management and capital raising, which we'll get into later on some of the challenges associated with that. So how did we know this was a deal, right? So when it comes to multifamily, deals are pretty simple, right? What is the average price per unit? What is it gonna cost you to get that unit to stabilization? What is your all-in cost per unit? So this particular portfolio, we got under contract for around $83,000 a unit. Units in the area are traded for $100,000 to $120,000. So right off the bat, we knew it was a good deal. Additionally, if you base it off of the average price per unit compared to the pro forma rents, a large quantity of these properties were one-bed units. The HUD fair market rents, and that's a really good indicator. If you don't know a market, go to HUD fair market rents to figure out the rents for one bed, two bed, three bed, four bed. That's essentially what Section 8 rents at. The HUD fair market rents were $1,200 per unit. Right there, if you compare an average price per unit versus $1,200 per unit, it's far above the 1% rule, right? It's like a 1.4, 1.5% rule, right? I can tell you right now, that's a freaking deal. I don't have to throw that as a fancy calculator to tell you that's a good deal, right? So when you're looking at larger deals, average price per unit compared to it's relative compared to the area, right? And then what is your delta compared to the average price per unit? And preferably, for me, I'm looking for like a 1.2, 1.3% rule of pro forma or market rents. Current rents never make sense, they never will. So you really have to base it off of where you can get rents. Anybody have any questions about that?
You say specifically you should do it separately by calculation, but if you have some kind of a system analyzer that you plug in that you use.
So I have this complex calculator called the Bigger Pockets calculator.
Okay.
Yep. And that's what I use. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, like I said, a bigger pockets calculator can underwrite up to 50 units, right? So it's pretty easy to throw it in a bigger pockets calculator and just determine what your cash on cash return is, right? I mean, also, the other thing when you take into account with one of these larger deals and you have to build into the return is your refinance money, right? And your disposition money. So when you're going for one of these larger deals, a lot of the money is made on the refinance or the sale, and that should be built into your returns that you're presenting to the investors. So to your point, there's a little bit more complexity with these larger deals, but up to 20 units, like the bigger pockets calculator is completely acceptable, right? And you kind of just want to understand kind of where your refinance capability is in a year and a half. And to add to that point, especially with value-add multifamily, it's incredibly important to buy these units when tenants are month to month. Like, I'm not going to buy this portfolio at what I paid if they're signed up for 2-year leases. Like, I'm not going to hold on to this these losses for 2 years when it doesn't make any sense to me. So it's incredibly important with value-add multi that you buy month to month, so there's a quick path to stabilization.
Is this the $6.5 million, the portfolio?
This is the portfolio that was the estate valued at 6.5. We got it under contract for 5.75 with the $250K seller credit.
So should we be hanging out at funeral homes? Just find some deals. Sorry.
Old time landlords. A lot of times, guys, landlords that are older, this one, he passed away. But a lot of times, older landlords are getting ready to retire, right? They don't want to deal with these headaches. They don't want to move to the next step in their life with these headaches. So being beginning investors and entering into the market as an investor, you can go into these old time landlords. A lot of times you can get seller financing from them because they still want residual income and don't want to pay taxes. But the properties have already been set up from a landlord angle. So you can kind of have a place to jump off from kind of relative ground. So old time landlords is a good place to source larger deals.
And just to add to that, I would say, right place, right time, right? Like, I was consistently putting in daily action where I was creating social media, that I was putting offer on deals that I already had 30 deals under that contract. I was putting myself out there, and then when people found a good deal, who'd they bring it to? They brought it to me, who was doing that daily action every single day. So you never know when this home run deal is gonna come across your desk. What you do know is, what you can do is do consistent daily action, and eventually those home run deals will come across your plate. Any other questions? So this particular deal, like I think I went over the price per unit, desirable area. So a large quantity of these units were in downtown New Bedford, which is kind of hipster, right? So, right off the bat, we knew this was a really desirable area, really good price per unit. And for New Bedford, they're putting in the largest solar farm down there. They're putting in a train station to Boston. So there was a lot of market fundamentals, right? And just all of these aspects culminated for this deal being a great deal, right? And how do we negotiate that deal? I think we mentioned, we incorporated seller credits. And in the due diligence process, we came to find out that there were illegal units. And that's extremely important, especially with multifamily. Because legal units are not determined by the appraiser. They're not determined by the property card. They're determined by the inspection office, which is not public information. So the inspection office has different information on their records than appraisers. So you actually have to call the inspection office to verify the legal number of units, right? Because if you close on one of these properties, then you try to get a permit done, the inspector walks it, they come out and find out 2 units in your portfolio are not legal units. That literally takes out, $160,000 out of my portfolio that I just bought, right? But it's incredibly important when it comes to negotiations. Because now I can go to them and be like, I'm not buying 69 units, I'm buying 67 units, give you $160K price cut, right? So that's some of the stuff we built in. And I think I mentioned on this, but it's incredibly important with these larger deals to build in construction money, right? And to build in an interest-only period. So you have time to stabilize the property. So, especially value and multi, the first couple months are gonna be really challenging. So that's when really you're gonna be incurring evictions, you're gonna be incurring vacancies, you're gonna be incurring unit turns, right? And during that period, you don't want this large mortgage payment hanging you down. And the way you get around that is you can pay interest only during the stabilization period, which you can negotiate with commercial lenders. And the amazing thing about commercial lenders is you can negotiate anything. I can negotiate the amortization schedule. I can negotiate construction money. I can negotiate the interest rate. I can negotiate if there's a prepayment penalty. If my business plan is to refinance in a year, year and a half, I'm not gonna choose a lender with a prepayment penalty, right? So there's many aspects when you get to larger properties that you can negotiate, and you can actually shop term sheets against each other with other lenders as well. I won't tell Brian that, but you can definitely do that, so.
Who's running numbers daily on smaller multis, like 1 through 4? Who's running numbers? Are you getting returns? What are your returns at? Your cash on cash? Are you getting 8s, 10s, cash on cash?
Not very often.
No, right?
It's mostly bad deals.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of power and bigger deals. You get better numbers. It's like buying at Costco, right? You buy a bunch of cans of Coke for, $20 and sell each one for $2. You know what I mean? So, I just wanted to clarify that.
And to add that point, like maybe the deal doesn't make sense where you're underwriting at, right? But there's power in square footage, right? And what do I mean by that? So say for example you run across a 4-unit, all 1-bed units, it's 3,300 square feet. I can guarantee if there's that amount of square footage, you can buy bedrooms in there, right? So at that point now you're underwriting it at all 2-bed units. Now the deal makes sense, and maybe that only takes $20,000 of carpentry work to convert 1 beds to 2 beds, right? So it's all about seeing value where other people don't see value, and a big indicator of that is square footage. Like I see all the time in Worcester on the MLS, 6-bed, 3-bath, 4,000 square feet. That equates to 1,300 square feet a unit. You can easily fit a 3 or 4 bed in that unit, right? So if I'm underwriting that property based off 3 or 4 bed rent versus 2-bed rents and just a little stabilization cost, my deal's gonna make sense and your deal's not. Any questions?
Stabilization cost, can you elaborate a little bit on that's new to me?
The stabilization cost is what is it gonna cost you to get to your pro forma or your market rents, right? So that could be vacancy costs. Maybe you have to deal with some vacancy, 1 to 2 months of lost rent. That could be unit turn costs. Maybe you have to infuse $10,000 to $15,000 in every single unit to get it to stabilization. That can mean you have to do the roof. That can mean you have to do the heating units. How much money is it going to take you to infuse in the property to get to market rents based off where you expect the future rents to be? Does that make sense?
So it's super rare that you're gonna buy a turnkey, market performing rental multi in the market. Otherwise, why would he sell it, right? If there was no headaches, it was performing, it was paying maximum amount of money, and it was never bothering me, why would I sell the property? So there's gonna be some work that you have to do as an investor to make it perform. And that first year is gonna be the stabilization period. That's your job. So when you buy into everything, just expect the first year is gonna be a rough year.
Other people's problems is how you make money. And I'll just give you a quick example. I bought a 6-unit in Worcester, Massachusetts, 8,000 square feet. All the units were 1,400 square foot units, all 4-bed units. We ended up getting it under contract for $1 million. Day one, it appraised for $1.2 million. Why do you think we got it under contract for that cheap? The tenant base was absolute crap. We had to deal with 2 evictions. The tenants were very tough to deal with, right? But I'll deal with that all day to make $200,000. Like that is the easiest $200,000 to me. I simply hire an eviction attorney. I let them do their thing. Once they're out, I hire my contractor to do the unit turn. I ain't doing the unit turn, and once they're out, I can rent those units for $2,500 each. Pro forma the building's $13,000, $14,000. I got it for $1 million, right? That makes sense all day. It's at the 1.3, 1.4%. Next slide.
And sometimes you won't, you'll have large investor base on these deals. Sometimes you won't do any distributions on the first year just because you gotta take time to stabilize the property. So that's another key item to remember.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a really good point that Josh made is in multifamily, if you expect the cash flow in the first 6 to 12 months, you're delusional. It takes time to make these assets perform. And if you're taking money out of the property the first 6 to 12 months, you're literally taking money from the operating budget that you will need to infuse later. So I normally don't take out money out of my properties for at least 6 to 12 months. And to be frank with you, I really don't take money out of my properties. I literally just, a lot of times, just leave it in there, let them build up, and essentially just let them be self-sustaining assets. When I have investors, it's a different story, but I do make it clear to investors that during the stabilization period, there's gonna be a point that we cannot give distributions until we get it to where we need it to be. Cool. So going into the due diligence, right? So I think I touched upon this, but it's incredibly important to verify, so when you get one of these larger units under contract, right? You want to definitely walk every single unit, take detailed pictures and notes of every single unit. That might mean like you're walking with 2 or 3 people. Maybe one person is grading the unit on an A to F scale. Maybe one person is grading the tenant on an A to F scale. Maybe one person's responsibility is taking pictures of the unit, right? You have to have a systematic approach to easily track this data later on. Because like I said, when you're walking 60 units, it all blends into one. It's very hard. Your mind's not gonna keep up with it. It's that simple, right? So it's incredibly important to keep detailed notes, because now that you have those notes, you're gonna go back to your underwriting and your assumptions, and you're gonna see if it makes sense, right? And with those notes, now you can determine, all right, this number of units needs about $10,000 to get it to stabilization. This number of units needs about $15,000 to get to stabilization. These units are turnkey, maybe they just need a paint job, maybe $3K, right? And that's gonna affect your numbers, and that's gonna help with you either like retrading or realizing that, the seller was telling the truth and it is a fantastic deal, right? Number of bedrooms and bathrooms. So I think I mentioned this, but it's incredibly important to look at the square footage, because they might be representing something as a 1-bed when it's actually a 2-bed, right? And that might actually help your underwriting that much more. So it's very important to verify the number of units, because a lot of times maybe units have like a double living room. They can turn into another bedroom with a simple wall and a door, right? So definitely keep track of that. And then I think I mentioned this legality of units. That's incredibly important. Never close on a multi without calling the inspection office to ensure the legal number of units, to ensure if there's any open permits, to ensure that any outstanding issues. Like, you do not want the inspector on your back, because trust me, it ain't fun. What documentation do you need, right? So you obviously need the rent roll, right? And you need to verify the income in one capacity or another, right? So you want bank statements, like anything you can get, tax returns, anything you can get to verify what they're saying is actually the truth, right? And added to that, it's incredibly important when it comes to multifamily to get estoppels prior to closing. And estoppels more or less for the tenant. I prefer that. I mean, you ideally want the tenant and the landlord signing this document, but worst case, I want the tenant more than the landlord, because they're agreeing to this. But estoppels essentially state, where the rents, like what the rents are at, and who's responsible for what, like utility-wise, security deposits, things like that, as the tenant's signing off on that, right? So estoppels are incredibly important whenever you're closing on any multifamily to get those prior to close. And then market fundamentals, right? So, you want to talk with local property managers to verify your assumptions, right? We underwrote this property at $1,100 a unit, right? To verify our assumptions, we called property managers around. We asked them, what do you think we can get for these units? These are where they're at, like these are the condition, what would you rent these for? So it's incredibly important to verify your assumptions with local market experts, brokers as well, right? And then also verify, vet, rent comparables, right? And make sure like MLS rentals align with where your rental assumptions are. Anybody have any questions? Okay, you back.
Those are super important, because if they're month-to-month tenants and maybe the lease is 10 years old or something, and you close, that seller's gone with his money. If he picks up his phone, it'll be amazing. But the tenant can try to, say you go to collect rent one day and you think it's $1,200, and they say, no, I pay $1,100. That's what I usually pay. Now how do you confirm that, right? So you need the estoppels that they've already signed, so you can say, no, here's the estoppel right here, you signed it, you told me that you pay, $1,200 a month.
Yeah,
Rent
basically
estoppel.
like a lease agreement then.
Yeah, so it's
It's
a protection.
it's them signing off all the terms.
Yeah, you want to do what deposit they have, because if they tell you that or seller said that they don't have deposit, and when they move out, they ask for the deposit. So you want to know what deposit they own and what their appliance they own, because they always say that they own something. So.
And that's super important too, because in eviction court, security deposits are a good way for them to get the case thrown out. And so if there's any mishandling of the security deposit, your case will get thrown out, and you'll have to make it right and then restart the eviction process. And if they're really smart, they'll drag it out a year. So if you want on the estoppel also what payments are supposed to be escrowed, so that you have track of them, so that if they go to court, they can't say, hey, we gave them a deposit, and say, what deposit? You know what I mean? So you have a tracking record of it.
Yeah, like last month in security. Like if we don't have the estoppels done and somebody's ready to leave, and like, hey, wait, I gave you I had $1,000 security. Like, you have no way to prove that. Like in that sort of situation, I probably got to pay that person $1,000 without that estoppel, right? And savvy tenants will know that, and they'll get it regardless, even if they gave security or not, right? So those estoppels are very important.
And if the court says you mishandle it, guess what? You're paying back in mass. You're paying in mass,
Yes.
you're paying back 3 times.
Yeah,
the
3
damages.
times.
And then you're gonna start the eviction over again.
Yep, 3 times damages.
You have a question?
Your attorney usually drafts your estoppels. And Doug Mercurio drafts all of our estoppels. He includes it in the purchase and sale. So it's incredibly important to do it early on because some attorneys really fight over the intricacies of like what's in that document.
And they're super tedious to get. So make sure your agent stays on the other agent to get, because you can imagine pulling teeth from tenants to try to get them to sign it.
I try to collect them myself, so I know who signed it, and they don't tell me later that they don't sign it because the owner can give you bullshit, you know.
So, the design. So, the great thing about buying a portfolio, or really buying anything in quantity, right? When you buy anything in quantity, you get a bulk discount, right? And it's the same with real estate. And that's why this portfolio was sold for such a great price per unit, is because we were buying all 12 units all at once, right? And because of that, we knew it was a fantastic deal. Like, we knew it was a great price per unit, in good condition, in a decent area. It made sense all day, right? And the other thing that I really specialize in, or a project manager, is buying properties from bad operators. Because, especially with commercial properties, like, you can buy a commercial property and simply increase the income of the property and do nothing else to the property. In a year, you can create hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity simply by being a good operator, right? So the value for this particular property, it was managed by bad operators. It went through the estate sale. It was given to the wife of the dead husband. She was never a landlord, didn't know how to do anything, right? So the properties, the portfolio fell in disarray. But that was her loss and our benefit in the fact that we took advantage of it because we knew that we could make this asset perform and we could get a good deal on it, right? So what was the business plan that we decided to do with this particular property? So, with these particular properties. So what we decided to do was a hybrid approach between a fix and flip and a buy and hold, right? So we decided to actually sell off the smaller properties, the 1 through 5 unit properties, sell them at a max price per unit to retail investors, upwards of $120,000, $125,000 a unit, and get our investors back their principal as quickly as possible, keep the larger stuff and stabilize this larger stuff and refinance and potentially sell that down the road. So that was our plan, is to get the max price per unit on the smaller stuff, get our investors back their capital while keeping the larger stuff. And we're currently in the process of doing that. With this particular portfolio, we already sold 2 properties out of the 12. We have 1 under contract right now, and we have 1 in the MLS, right? And I believe we already returned about 18 to 20% of investor principal within, 6 months or something like that, 7 months. So yeah, it's definitely going well. And then, okay, touch on that too. Anybody have any questions about that?
So you got like, is your loan backed by all of the properties? Like that's the collateral, or how did you split out like portions of it?
So that's a very insightful question, and that's why thinking ahead and having a mentor is incredibly important, right? So when I got into this real estate game, I ended up finding a mentor, John Bambachi. He actually is the broker or whatever at, not the broker, he's like the team lead at Candor. He owns hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of units, right? I want him to be my mentor. But with somebody like that, the only way that they're really gonna take you under wing is you provide him value. So the way I provided him value was I became an agent on his team, and I brought him value in the form of commissions. And I started these meetups, and I built these brands, right? So in the course of me providing him value, I made him tens of thousands of dollars, right? But a result of that is now he picks up my calls. Whenever I have an issue, something comes up, I get his advice. And for this particular deal, that's exactly what happened. I ended up getting his advice on this particular deal, and he made it a point, he's like, make sure with the lender you negotiate partial release clause, right? Meaning that you have the ability to sell off property by property and not get rid of the entire loan. Normally with these larger loans, it's all or nothing. You either sell the whole loan or keep it, right? But because of that insight, we were able to sell off pieces of the portfolio, pay back some of the loan, and give an investor back their capital while keeping the loan in place, which is honestly an incredibly smart move because the loan, I believe, is at a 5.65 rate, and it's 2 years interest only, and it's a 30-year amortization schedule. So it was a really great loan that we would not want to lose. Any other questions?
Do you ever just like try to sell off enough to just pay off the investors and retain the rest, like free and clear for yourself?
So the way we structured this deal, so it was our first syndication, so we try to be pretty generous with our investors. We did a 7% preferred term, meaning the first 7% goes to our investors, and everything after that is a 70-30 split, meaning the people who bring the money get 70% of the upside, 70% of the cash flow, 70% of the refinance money, 70% of the disposition money above that 7% preferred return, and the general partners get 30%, right? But, so with this particular deal, their equity is always in place. If we pay back their principal, all we simply do is remove the 7% prep. They still keep the equity, right? So the goal with this particular property is sell the smaller stuff, get them back all their principal back, and then distribute the capital at a 70-30 rate. Does that answer your question? Any other questions?
So when you start cutting off properties, when you start carving off them, the bank's gonna be worried about maintaining that 70% loan to value or 75% loan to value. When you send the smaller properties are gonna sell for a lot of money. So that's what they're gonna be worried about. So sometimes you may have to like have a plan beforehand and buy the ones that you plan on selling off at maybe a hard money loan or a faster loan, and keep the ones that you're gonna hold on a credit union loan. Or you can work it ahead of time and have a plan with the credit union so that that loan to value proportionate is kept as you sell off properties.
So the units aren't like, your average price per unit is 80 grand, right? So it doesn't proportionally look across all of the, like, your portfolio, every unit is 80 grand, it's dependent on, I guess, every bedroom.
For us, it was dependent on the appraised value,
Yeah.
right?
The whole.
Yeah, no. So to that point, because we negotiated a partial release clause, we intentionally had them appraise each individual property, so we knew the value that we could release it from and pay the bank that. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like, you gotta think ahead, right? And the only reason I thought ahead is because my mentor has done these portfolio deals before, and he's ran across these issues that he ran across them the hard way. And because I had a mentor, I avoided a lot of these pitfalls. Any other questions? Yes, right? So the good thing about this particular deal, it was a fantastic deal. Great price per unit. We were walking into $1 million in equity, like I said. We had a solid team in place. There were after everything's said and done, there were about 7 GPs, all brought different skills, right? Really solid team in place. And like I said, we got amazing debt. With this particular portfolio, we got a $250K seller credit. We got a $300,000 line of credit, so we got about $550,000 that we could use to stabilize the property, not out of our own pocket. We got a 30-year amortization schedule. First 2 years, interest only, a 5.65 interest rate. And yeah, it was amazing debt, right? And the way we got that, we found a really good broker who found us that particular debt, right? The back, right? Capital raising ain't easy. And the reason why I say that is, you talk with people, you make a list, they tell you what they're gonna contribute, then the day comes when they're supposed to wire the money, half of them don't wire it, right? So going into this, me and my partner thought we could raise, pretty much the whole deal. After everything was said and done, about 4 weeks prior to close, we had to raise about $1.8 million. Me and my partner raised $1 million, right? And we were sweating bullets. And we did everything possible to raise that money. One tactic I did was I made a list of everybody I thought would be interested in the deal. And during the due diligence process of 3 months, I reached out to 3 people a day. And by the end of 3 months, I reached out to over 300 people. Another thing I did was go to as many meetups as I possibly could, right? Go on podcasts, right? At that point, I was on a Bigger Pockets podcast. That definitely helped my case. But at the end of the day, this was my first deal that I was actually taking investor money. Prior to this, I did everything with my own money. It was incredibly awkward. for me to ask for money initially. Really awkward, right? So, at that point, I think me and my partner only raised about $1 million, and we were like sweating bullets. We had to make a decision. Do we think we can raise the remaining $800,000 in a 4-week span based off our forecasted raise? Absolutely not the case. Or do we bring somebody in, give away some of the equity, and then raise the rest of the money, right? And that's exactly what we did. We ended up bringing my mentor about 3 to 4 weeks before. I believe we had about $800,000 left. We gave away, I don't know, like 45% of the deal, and he raised the rest with like 4 phone calls, right? So, I mean, that just goes to show you, it's better to have 50% of something than 0% of nothing, right? So, it's incredibly important to surround yourself around people doing what you want to do, so when you run into scenarios like this, you have somebody to lean on. Because real estate is not a one-man army, and if it is a one-man army, you ain't gonna scale quickly. You're gonna scale very, very, very slowly, right? And once you realize it's a team game and you realize how to play well with others, your growth is gonna be exponential. The other. So the closing on such a large asset like this is incredibly stressful. Everybody and anybody is yelling at you from 20 different directions. You know, the seller's threatening to cancel the deal when you're this late in the game, right? You know, and I believe at that point, that's when we negotiated the illegal units, right? So the seller was really kind of pushing back at us and essentially ready to back out of the deal. So it got really, really tough. We ended up making it through. And at that point, this was in August 2023. Interest rates were rising and rising and rising. We secured amazing debt from the bank, but at that point, rates were 7, we got a 5.65. The bank was banking on us not closing the loan. They were hoping we did not close on this loan. So the bank had very tight deadlines that we had to abide by, or we would have lost that rate lock at 5.65, right? Incredibly, incredibly, incredibly stressful, but we did make it through it, right? And the other ugly thing is you gotta be really careful when it comes to these larger deals to be talking about it in public. And I made this mistake. You know, during raising, I started talking about the deal with other people. I had 2 other parties come in there and try to steal the deal from us. 2 other deals. One particular person called the broker and said they can't close, let me close, right? So with these deals, these larger deals, people get really cutthroat because with these larger dollar figures comes obviously people being more cutthroat, right? So with a deal like this, you gotta be very, very protective of who you tell, because as a result of that, we end up having to pay $100,000 more for the deal, right? You gotta be really careful with who you disclose these deals to. And questions?